Budget hearings. We had a good day yesterday. Looking for, okay. Carrie, you here, you want to talk about elected officials? Usually this isn't action that we take until later in the cycle, but, you know, yeah.
You've gone two different ways with this. Sometimes during this conversation, you'll talk about exactly where you want to place all the elected officials for the upcoming year, which is why I provided you with that data showing comparable entities and the chief deputies where they'll be next year too. What you did last year for the first time was that you put in a budgeted amount, and since you do need to talk about elected official pay in December and pass a resolution, you just held off on conversations about the specific amount until then. And I think we put in the budgeted amount of whatever the matrix adjusted by. So that would be an option for you to put in just 2.5% right now and make decisions later if you wanted to, or you could talk about specific amounts.
That'd be where I'm inclined to. We would treat everybody the same, ourselves included, but do we want to have discussions on any individual elected position or office?
I like Carrie's idea of just putting the money aside and we'll just discuss the breakdown later.
Perfect. Any objection? Sounds good. That was easy.
Thanks.
All right. We've updated numbers. Morning again, Ben. It's
Morning.
revenue and expense adjustments.
Yes.
So start with the good stuff.
So we tried to summarize this a little bit differently. So the what we provided you for a cash applied illustration for the general fund is a summary where we think we left off yesterday. So if I looking at this, the first column would represent the budget request as we receive those. You know, our revenue expectations, the appropriations amounts, our cash applied to that $6.4 million. So we've had requests for 9 new positions plus one partially grant-funded position. That's the $776,000. We have FF&E of $608,000. The SAO software of $250,000. The outside agencies have requested just shy of $400,000 in increase in funding, and so that would lead to an increase a little over $2 million in appropriations. We'd add back our 5% holdback, so the new cash applied amount, and if we were to fund everything, would have been $8.5 million. That compares to our normal cash applied that we would spend would have been 5.8. Again, as we talked yesterday, that $858,000 we would spend out of our cash reserves. So that brought us to a total recommended cash applied of $6.6 million, which was about $1.8 million short.
6.6 or 6.9?
Did I
He's going through the original budget request.
I'm going on the left column.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay.
So anyway, that left this is a shortfall of $1.8 million, which with a cash applied ratio of 9.1%. So then after our conversations yesterday, we talked about some options for revenues and appropriations. So we kind of layered those in. So for revenue adjustments, we looked at registered deeds. We could see some potential $250,000 additional revenue there. We talked about the public defender's grant funding for a position, getting us another $69,000. We've talked about potential liquor licenses and franchise tax additional revenue of $200,000, and then we also had a conversation about changing the increase in the health insurance cost from 15 to 13%. That gave us about $85,000. That kind of balanced the budget. So then for appropriation adjustments, we looked, I think the conversation there was we would fund 4 additional positions, one being the appraiser in training, the other one being the public defender, 1 position, and then 2 deputy state's attorneys. That gave us that $358,000. And then we would layer in the additional 1% 1% matrix adjustment, so for another $375,000. Keeping the FF&E and the state's attorney software, pulling out the $100,000 in marketing expense that had been included in the budget, and then adjusting the court's budget down by $400,000, give us an additional $1 million in appropriations. So kind of layering all those additional revenues and appropriations together, we would balance the budget with a cash applied of almost $7 million. Now that's a 9.6% cash applied ratio, of course higher than we normally did. But if you would, so we also talked yesterday about funding the elections with at least half of the election cost with cash applied or a reserve balance there at $350,000. So if you just took that $858,000 for the FF&E and the software plus the election cost funding, if you took those two out, we would be back at an 8% cash applied ratio. But I think that's kind of how we heard the conversation yesterday.
Okay. The 858,000, what FF&E are we funding for? I mean, is that the whole, this building, that building?
Yeah, so that would include the extension building. It would include the state's attorney's remodel. That would include the treasurer's office and the auditor's office. Not sure.
Highway department?
No, that's in the highway fund.
That's in the highway budget.
Okay.
Are the vehicles in here? Are the vehicles in here?
All the vehicles are still in the budget. We have left them in, yeah.
That's right, we left them in there.
Okay, so it's a good point to start from. What we haven't talked about, unless
No,
there's
go
other
ahead. No,
questions.
go ahead. I think you're probably going where I was going to go.
Building
so.
fund?
Oh, no, I wanted to just verify what positions we have in
Okay.
here.
So from my notes, we are adding 4 positions. That's in that 358,000. So there's appraiser in training. I have one new attorney for the public defender, and then 2 positions for the state's attorney's office, the deputy state's attorney. So total of 4.
Commissioner Eberger.
Just a question, so the public defender's office, when we're anticipating we're getting a UJS grant, so will that position be tied to the fact that we won't know, although we will know before our finalized budget? Just wondering if we want to tie that to that funding, because that's what we're banking on.
I think you had said you included that revenue, that
Yes, they
69.
did, but we don't have confirmation of it until the end of July or the August or something. So I'm just saying,
Right. So the net of it,
So does the position?
yeah,
Maybe.
that's what I'm just saying, is,
Okay.
are we there or are we not there? Because if the funding disappears, does the position disappear? Or do we wait and find out?
I'd say we leave it in there. If things change, we change.
Well, yeah, I wasn't going to take it out, I just raising the question.
yeah, I think the net adds about, $30,000, right?
Okay. Does that answer your question?
Yep.
Commissioner Bender?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Other questions regarding the numbers that we're going to be talking about today?
Mr. Chairman, I personally am not sure that we need the appraiser position, which includes an additional pickup truck. I mean, we're applying new technologies on a regular basis in that department, and it seems to me that we ought to be able to get more productivity with pictography and that kind of stuff. I think we're enforcing the building permits at a greater level than ever, but I don't think that's an existential problem to our county operation that needs to be have additional funding.
Okay, and I would argue that by the time we fund this position and get it filled, it'll have been over 5 years since we have added anybody to that department. And in a county that's seen the growth that we've seen, and I do agree with you, technology, and I think, you know, as far as Chris Lilla and his use of it and conversion of everything has been quite good, but it still has its limitations. I'm still in favor of keeping the position, primarily as his liaison in the conversations I've had with him. We have not done a complete I don't know, inspection's the right word, of, or reassessment of properties the way that it should be done, at least every 5 years in 17 years. So that kind of gives you an idea. They've been making do with what they've had for quite a while, and he does have ambitious plans to get everybody equalized with the reinspection, reassessment of all properties, and it's going to require him to have an additional appraiser to get that done. So.
Well, I'm not going to agree with you on that one. First of all, there's limitations on the revenue that's generated out of equalization by tax laws, either 3% or the growth. We had less contested equalization applicants this year than we've had in years. And I agree with Jeff I think there's opportunities that frankly need to be almost forced to do more things virtually than being in-house or site visits. We don't go into hardly any homes anymore, so everything is done, could be done by GIS if necessary. And I just don't see that is a higher priority than, frankly, the Public Defender's Office or the SAO's office. So I would put a higher priority on those two departments rather than, because we already know what's happening with public safety issues. Equalization's got limitations that I think, frankly, ought to be
And Chris isn't here.
encouraged to do virtually.
Yeah. Chris isn't here, but I from the conversations I've had with him, again, as his liaison, he's added the additional software and technology to his office and accounting for other things such as depreciation. You know, you can look at a satellite image of something from above, but until you go out into the front yard and walk around the house, it's really hard to say, well, you know, the depreciated value of something is X. When this house looks like this and this one appears this way, that's where we get the people contesting their valuations. That house is newer this and newer that versus my house. So that's why he wants to, in order to use the technology that he's adapted, he needs to have the eyes looking at it in order to apply what he's been tasked with given. So I'm going to stand by my position that I do think we need that appraiser. So. But we can disagree.
Mr. Chairman, and, you know, I fully understand what you're saying, but, you know, we're spending lots of money with these new computer systems, which should be making more come out of the end of the factory. And that said, we're paid to make difficult decisions, and we can't be someone's favorite uncle on every issue, or favorite aunt, or is it favorite grandma? I don't know. Anyway, so it's my job to look people in the eye and tell them what they don't want to hear. And I'm willing to do it.
Okay.
I'm on the fence. I'm on the fence on that one, so I'm not sure which way I want to fall.
How about if we save it on the side and see where
Plenty of time to.
where other things come out here in the next hour or whatever? Unless,
Yeah, I I understand where equalization is coming from, and it has been a while since we have added position to that department. And I am the liaison for the state's attorney's office, and I know that they are feeling a lot of pressure from workload there. And so, you know, I'd be happy if we didn't fund that position and we moved that money into law enforcement. But I am glad that we got 2 positions into the state's attorney's office, and so I'd be open to visiting a little bit more with Chris offline and making a decision
And
upon
again,
that.
I can't do his argument for him the way he can, so I would encourage all of you to probably talk to him.
Mr. Chair, I think he might be on Zoom.
He's on Zoom. Are you there, Chris? Chris Lula. Is he muted?
Dean?
One option could be is if you wanted to leave it in there with an asterisk, and I'm making notes for our budget hearing on September 7th. If you wanted to review that there, I would just throw that out as one option for you.
Okay.
And does that include the vehicle purchase
Well,
for
the vehicle
25?
goes with the individual, so, yeah. Without the position, he wouldn't need the vehicle, so it
So
would.
a total of 90,000.
Okay, next.
All righty, so asterisks that one, and I'd encourage some conversation, and we'll see where that goes. Okay. I guess what I would really like to point out here is that this budget we are working hard to balance it. We are not doing any additional opt-out money. We are working within the means that we've had, and the, 1.2%, or what was the CPI that we were getting?
CPI of 1.2%.
1.2%, plus our growth.
Yeah, 2.6, right?
2.6, so, yeah. So we are working to make this budget happen without any additional revenues coming forth, so. All righty. Other questions for the auditor? Okay. Yesterday, we did not talk about the building fund. Should we talk about the building fund?
I think we have a detailed,
Was that on the June 9th?
yes, it was, well, it was a additional. Was there? We added a, one page with.
It was 15th.
So we have here, this is the kind of.
Yesterday's.
Yeah, the detail listing of all of the projects under the building fund. I would say that, other than we have a 3 million for, in here? Yeah, the 3 million for the remodel in the state's attorney's office. The rest of it is just kind of normal operating expense, right, to maintain the campus and all of our facilities. I think looks like we spend about, 3.5 million a year. This is probably even a little bit less than normal if you take out the 3 million. So I think it's just, I don't want to speak for Mark Krenz, but I think it looks like a kind of a normal operating budget.
What happened with the money we got for the gravel pit? Has that just gone into general fund, or did that go into the building fund?
No, I
or-
think we put that into the building fund, yeah.
And we have other properties we'd like to get rid of, I believe. We've got the 904 building. plus we have our correctional facility on Russell Street. Is there some point where we might get some cash back on those things?
Yeah, I think we're looking to be able to sell those as soon as we can. But Commissioner Barth brings up reminds me of a good point, right? We put $2 million into the building fund from the sale of the gravel pit, so it's effectively funding the majority of your remodel expenses.
Chairman, I would just add too that the fire settlement is in this money,
Okay.
correct, Kim? Just short of $1 million.
Okay.
Those are the two.
We have a building fund revenue. What is that annualized?
About $4.5 million.
Okay, so 4.5 million. How much of that goes to debt reduction, bond payments?
What we have projected for next year is $1.4 million. If we, is the building fund summary?
It was slide 7.
Yep, slide 7.
I knew it was in there somewhere, but thank you, Kim.
We are projecting that we will use about $1.8 million in cash reserves in 2022. But again, we're basically just spending the proceeds from the gravel pit in doing that. And if we do the transfer that was discussed, moving available cash of $13.3 million from the general fund to the building fund, we would end 2022 with over $17 million in the building fund for future projects.
Okay. So basically, after the revenues and the debt reduction, we have 3.1 million left from the levy. And we got where are we at? $5 million, but 1.8 million is coming from the reserves. So fairly well budgets, or balances out.
Trish is getting to that summary for the building fund
Okay.
right now.
Okay.
So the middle column, the requested budget shows our 4.6 million in revenues. And then if you scroll down, we've got 5 million in cash projects, which would include the admin building remodel. And then just below that, 1.4 million of debt service, showing that we would dip into cash reserves, the 1.8 million, with an ending cash reserve of 17 million.
And the 1.8 million is that there's no special income or revenue from that. It's just what we're going to use in reserves. Okay. Okay. So do we want to spend 1.8 million from our cash reserves from our building fund? And the reason I asked the question is, we talked about, we did the $10 million bond for the highway, knowing that we got another potential for 10 million that we could bond for. Does that bond payments for just 10 million or up to 20 million factored into the expense?
So the 10 million that we already issued is in there, and we also forecasted another $10 million bond issuance for 2020, end of this year or into early year.
So the bond payment on that second 10 million is also
That's
in
correct.
here that we,
Yes.
okay. So we're really, we got 3 million left for the highway, and we're gonna be funding this building from cash. We're probably only gonna be we don't need to bond for an additional 10. We probably need.
Yeah, it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 10. Just don't know what the number is. I think it's going to, I think we thought it would be at least 5 million more. But I'm not sure if it'll, depends. You could use your cash, maybe that's what you're implying.
instead of spending it from cash. I mean, maybe I'm on a different train here, Ben, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. So we have $10 million in additional bond issuance built into the budget, which would fund the highway shop and our renovations in the extension building. We don't know if we're going to need to issue a total or 10, right? It will probably be some amount less than that.
It doesn't show an income, that extra 10 million coming in on your revenue side, does it?
No, we have that in 2021.
Oh,
And that comes into the capital projects fund, not the building fund. The proceeds from the bond issue would flow to the capital projects fund, and that's where we pay all the construction costs.
you guys get that? Okay.
Ben, is it possible to do some cash flow projections on both of those forecasts, if you will, for buildings and capital, to kind of look at maybe eventually a policy on what the balances of those should be?
Yeah, we could do some sort of analysis on that to make some recommendations.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that it's important for us to keep track of cash balances to make sure that we have enough funding to meet our emergency needs or growth needs.
Okay, so do you have a specific recommendation? Sure we are.
I do, but I'll let you do it first.
Okay.
Otherwise, then I'd be doing it. I think there's got a percentage of reserves that we need to maintain, and it's going to be based on some of the projects that we're looking at.
Okay.
And, I can give you numbers, but I don't think that's fair to you either.
Okay. All right.
And since Kim's going to retire someday, couple, 3 years after we let her. But anyway,
Are you asking about the building fund
Both.
specifically? Because I think we could maybe take another look at that capital project, that projection that we did with the
Yeah.
financing and the
Mm-hmm.
cash availability.
yep.
But you're looking to get some recommendation on the level of funding that should remain in that account. Okay.
No different than the highway funds in the cash issues that we
Okay.
face with that group.
All right. Yeah.
And I also think that we ought to consider the projections of what we would frankly sell those 2 buildings we still own to increase those revenue sources.
Yeah, so, I mean, we did a similar exercise back in February, right? That kind of layered all those in, looking out into the future, so we can build off of that.
Yep.
I think on track with you there, understand that, so, yeah. I think it paints a clearer picture.
Of where we're at.
Okay. All righty. So, discussion on on the building fund.
I think it looks fine. I'm comfortable using the surplus, basically the gravel pit funds to fund some of these projects for next year. And, absent any additional information we might get, I think I'm comfortable with this.
Okay. Thumbs up.
Trying to think, where did we project the drainage issues at the highway department with our neighbors?
Isn't that in the highway building fund?
No, it's not there.
It's in the building fund. You're talking about the jail?
No, he's talking about the highway.
Highway department.
It should be part of your capital project, I would think, that was part of.
No,
Is what, 50,000 or something?
I don't remember the exact number.
This is the drainage issue?
The
I think
drainage
that was
issues
50,000.
To the east.
Yeah.
of the highway
That was the
department.
amount that I remember, 50,000.
Okay.
I think that amount is correct, and you raise a good point. It may not be in this budget.
I don't think it is.
Well, it would be the capital projects fund.
Okay. Can we double check that?
Okay. So we are good with the building fund.
Yes.
We've been over vehicles. Everybody's tying, we're going to be tying vehicles to staffing positions, so if there are any adjustments there. Outside agencies, we're leaving at funding where it was in the past. FF&E, we've had the discussion. State's Attorney's Office, talked about moving the money into basically a placeholder within IT, pending the outcome of the discussion, what's the best way to proceed with that software, internal or external. And then we have left the matrix adjustment at the 2.5%. Okay. Kind of went through it quick, but we've had discussions. Do we want to
Is the
reopen?
2.5% reflected there? I only see,
It was reflected in that sheet that I gave out this morning.
The
Excuse me.
final, the right one?
Yeah. Yeah,
The final budget? Yep.
yeah. Now, I'm not sure if we meant to skip over D, staffing request. Do we need to discuss that one?
Didn't we
I
do
think
it
we
all?
kind of did.
Yeah,
Okay.
we kind of did.
Okay.
I mean, if you want to peel that Band-Aid back again, looking at, back up.
It kind of lump sum for the state's attorney's office as opposed to
Yeah,
the
I think that's what we
positions.
did, is just gave them enough to.
The notes say that we gave them the equivalent of 2 attorney positions.
Yeah.
Last week's HR slide, she had a summary of position growth for departments requesting new positions, and the public defender has grown by 30% since 2012. The state's attorney's office has grown by 65% since 2012. The treasurer's office by 10%, and equalization by 10% has been the growth from the areas that we're looking at now. Commissioner Bender.
And I just note, when you talk about percentages, it's a little bit misleading. While the state's attorney's office has had a lot of growth, some of those, they're not all legal positions, they're not all attorneys. Some of it was required by Marcy's Law. So a lot of them are positions that, for example, the PDO wouldn't have, investigators, victim witness assistants, and digital discovery technicians.
Yep, they've grown by actually 11 attorneys out of the 25 positions total, so, yeah. At least from the notes I see, so, yeah. So, talking about staff again, we'll put that Band-Aid back on, unless there's other discussion. Okay. Okay, break's over. It says break on here. Anyway. Opt-out dollars, we talked a little bit about that, and the cash applied. We are not looking at accessing any opt-out dollars in our cash applied without the one-time expenses, which, are, I think, justifiable in saying one-time expenses. We are at 8%, which is pretty typical. Carol?
I was just going to summarize for you.
Perfect, let's do it.
Ready to go through and do that. Just looking ahead, I think you guys did an amazing process in this amount of time, and that goes to show the prep work that the auditor's office did and you guys did in reviewing all this. So unless you give us different direction, this will move forward for a final review on July 20th, with the adoption of the provisional budget on July 27th. We will have on September 7th, we are statutorily required to do a budget hearing on that day. I've made 2 notations from today's direction to make sure that we cover at that time. One is the appraiser position in the vehicle, to revisit that. The other is the request for Ben to have a building and capital cash flow projections. I couldn't read my handwriting right there. So we do that in September. So those are my final comments. And we would look forward to any further direction or discussion you guys would have.
When do we start talking about the COVID 13 point whatever $1 million number and what we're going to prioritize?
That we're moving to the building fund?
my thought would be we get through the budget process, we're gonna start to socialize this with the department heads, and start to get some ideas. And then, I think it's still unknown where we can,
Right.
I think we can find $5 here, $10 there, but we've got a basic, mountain climb as far as getting to the number. We're still, like, we have meetings with the city coming up that will help us, give us some direction, I think. And just trying to have some conversations with our peers.
Is there a date tied to that number, that money
Well,
that,
we have to have it committed by December 31st of 2024.
but is that the 37 million or the 13 million? I'm talking the first.
Yeah.
When you talk about the
13 million.
from our excess from COVID funds from 2020, right? So you can have a discussion of that any time, right? That, you have a discussion whether you want to use that, you could potentially use that to fund whatever's the remainder of the highway shop and your other, the extension building remodel. You have a discussion about keeping those funds for future projects.
Okay.
It could effectively change our budget a little bit based on how that would be used, frankly. And
Absolutely.
I don't really want to leave that too far down the road if we have one-time expenses that we could consider.
Yeah. And I would just remind you, borrowing money now is still very cheap.
Right.
Probably 2%. It makes a lot of sense to borrow long-term money at this point.
Yep.
Mr. Chairman, I wonder if we could, years ago, the auditor's office looked at the budget after we made it and made additional recommendations. And I wonder if you guys would consider working on that again and deciding, even if it's nickel and diming, ways of economizing.
Commissioner Bender?
I have a comment going back to the discussion Gerald had brought up. And, I'm in favor of using that money, the 13 million, for long-term capital projects. And I think it'd be an interesting discussion about the pros and cons of, whether we use debt now when it's at a historical low and we save that money knowing that we're going to launch a process to look at replacing this building and we keep that, powder dry for that, or whether it makes sense to use it now and just borrow in the future. And it requires a bit of a crystal ball probably. And I don't know that we need to do that today, but just from my point of view, I think that it makes sense to keep that money and use it for capital projects when we know we have a lot of capital projects that we're doing right now and that we are committed to looking at and doing in the future, in the near-term future, 10, 12-year future.
I think that's another reason, as Gene suggested, that we have kind of a policy in place for building cash and capital expenditures so that we can make projections using potentially that for some other purpose. You're right, the money is cheap, but that's kind of like saying going to the rummage sale is cheap, but if you don't go at all, it's even cheaper.
My comments would be, you can keep it for future needs. The risk you have is that you'll slowly bleed it off as well over time. So,
That's why we need a policy for reserve balances, I think.
Okay. And to Commissioner Barth's idea, I'm always open to, and especially the cash projections. Where does this line cross that line? How much time do we have to look at these things? What should we be considering now so we can extend all these things further out? I mean, we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish either as we look into the future. So always good to know what things are going to be projected at down the road, so. Okay, any other comments? Any public input? Anybody here for public input? All righty. We are done here. Thank you, everybody.